Hey guys, welcome to Money Mindset and More. And today I'm going to cover two very hot topics in these days: tariffs and trade deficit. Now, tariff is something which is a tax which is imposed by a country in onto the goods which are getting imported from a different country, and that is always applies to the goods which will be coming in, not going out. Most of the time, countries don't have any tariff on exports just to make sure that their domestic industries are not struggling, but all the time they will put tariffs on imported good because those will be coming from a cheaper labor countries or cheaper services countries. Most of the time it is paid by the company which is importing the goods in the country. So for example, if somebody, let's say for example Walmart is importing goods from India, then Walmart is going to pay that tariff. Most of the people understand that if there is a tariff on certain countries, that country might pay or the exporter might pay. That is not the case. So let's say US has put 50% tariff on Indian goods. Now who will pay that? Indian companies are not paying that. That's a wrong perception. Neither India as a country is paying that. It will be always paid by the company which is importing the goods inside the United States. So let's say, for example, it's Walmart, then they will pay the uh, tariffs. Now, ultimately, Walmart will also not pay in long run. They might pay those tariffs in 1 quarter or 2 quarter or something like that. But as soon as it becomes the long term tariff, then they are going to pass that particular tariff by the prices of the products to their consumers. So ultimately, in case of US, all the consumers are going to see higher prices of the product which they are getting imported. Now, the argument from the US government is that they want to increase domestic productions. Now, there is some merit to that, but not always. So, for example, if anything which can be manufactured in India or China for $1 and you put 50% tariff on that, then it becomes $1.5. But if the same thing can be manufactured inside the United States for $2, even after tariff, the product will be cheaper to import. So the argument of that bringing manufacturing or certain industries back will not work at all. And also, when you want to get manufacturing industry back in any particular geographies, forget about US, any particular geographies, normally it requires a lot of capital investment upfront, and it takes at least 12 to 24 months to build those plants. And by the time government changes and things will change, so no investor will also invest in those sectors. And ultimately, because of tariff, the prices will go up and there will be no additional manufacturing jobs. So what will be the impact? The impact will be definitely a slowdown in the economic activities and ultimately a root cause of recession, probably, if you want to say that way. Some in certain scenarios it might be good also when you want to make sure certain net industries are protected. So for example, India have very high tariff on agriculture products, so US cannot export those products to India because India has very high tariff. Now, the logic which India always gives that because of the farmers and the population and everything, it's very unfair for Indian farmers to compete with farmers in US who have a very better technologies and other things available for them to utilize in the farming industries and things like that. So because of that, India have very high tariff on that areas, which US is trying to negotiate. But having said that, it's not always advisable or it is not good for a free economy across the globe to have very high tariff. You should have something 10%, 5%, maybe 15%. More than that is just become uh, what you call reciprocately, and then it's not very helpful. Now, what is a trade deficit? So I will take an example to say that, but trade deficit is something which a country, the difference between import and export of a country will be a deficit. So in case of US and India, let's say for example, India and US do almost 212, $213 billion total trade between goods and services. In those goods and services, US normally exports around $40 billion to India, but it imports almost $87 billion. So the difference is around $47 billion, which is a trade deficit. Now, that trade deficit cannot be linked back to the importing country, because the reason is, if the consumption of certain products or goods or services in a country like US, which will be always higher, so if the consumers are consuming more, you will always have a trade deficit on export and import side. So you cannot have same consumption level in a developed country compared to a developing countries, and that's why US has trade deficit with almost every single economy, including China. How they can reduce it? They can probably reduce the consumption. I lived in India and I lived in US, and I can tell you, US consumers are far more able to spend things which probably Indian consumer will never spend at all. So things like clothing, things like home decor, and all those things, US consumers just spend every single month on those things. I have never seen that Indian consumer will do that same thing in India at the level which America does. So there will be always a trade deficit. But when it comes to services, India and US are almost at par. Maybe US is a probably surplus. So US does almost around $42 billion services export to India, and it imports around 41.6 or something like that. So there is a surplus. It means that India is trying to consume more services from US because of the expertise US has in certain areas. So for example, pharmaceutical, healthcare, engineering, all those things are very advanced in US. So those more services India is getting imported rather than exporting on those. People think that India has a lot of IT services revenue which is coming, and India is exporting a lot of IT services. The truth is that India is also importing a lot of financial knowledge, healthcare knowledge, pharmaceutical knowledge. So US is also exporting a lot of services to India. So there is no deficit from US perspective. But on the good side, there is a lot of deficit. Now, when you try to see and negotiate the rates, tariff rate based upon deficit, that doesn't make any sense. If anybody who understands economics, it doesn't make any sense, because deficit is nothing to do with a country's cost of production or the lower labor. It is always based upon the consumptions. So for example, if you take India's overall trade, India does around $440 billion worth of export, and it does almost $672 billion worth of imports, and it's always in trade deficit. The reason is very simple: India doesn't have oil at all. So all the import surplus which India has is because of, sorry, all deficit is because of the oil, and that is not going to change. And that is why you must have seen in the news a lot of pushback from India on buying cheap oil. So India buys cheap oil wherever it finds, and that perfectly makes sense for the economy. You cannot just keep buying higher prices energy, because your deficit is based on that. So the moment you start buying high price oil, your deficit will increase, and then your economy will start struggling internally. So in the recent tension between India and US, I believe that India has taken a good call based upon preserving their own economy, rather than having some industry push back on textile and others, where there will be definitely lot of hit from imports. But overall, it's going to sustain, India will sustain these particular tariffs as of today. On the other hand, American consumers are going to see a lot of high prices in next 2 to 3 quarters. It will not start seeing now, because that normally all these retailers or anybody who sell goods, they store it for 2 or 3 quarters. So right now, whatever Walmart is, for example, or Target is selling in their store, that was already bought 6 months ago, and it is already in their warehouses. So there will be no tariff impacts. Anything which is hitting today and will go into the store, let's say 30 days or 60 days from now, and that has a new tariff applied to that, then it's going to be increased cost for everybody in the United States, and that is going to have a larger impact unless government figures out whether they can improve the wages and things like that, which I don't see. But those are the different things. There can be positive impacts from tariff as well, but considering there is no path to utilize that higher tariff to increase the gross domestic production of United States, I don't see that happening. So yeah, these are the points which I wanted to cover from my perspective. It's definitely something more concerning with all the higher tariffs. India has 50%, Brazil has 50%, China has 35%. All those countries are low manufacturing countries, and even if you put 100% tariff, the cost of production in those countries will be always lower than the US for a similar products. So bringing back iPhone manufacturing or bringing back any pillow manufacturing or a bedsheet manufacturing in US, it's not going to happen. US has to increase its own stronghold on services pieces, and they should export more services to those manufacturing industries or new industrial countries to increase their share of probably increase the share of export, and then ultimately reduce the deficit which they have on the trading side. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, please share in the comment. Thanks very much. See you next time. Bye bye.